With increasing prices diminishing the welfare of Nigerian households, the World Bank has projected that Nigeria may have one of the highest inflation rates globally in 2022. The Global Financial Institution, in its November edition of its Nigerian Development Update, disclosed that the country's inflation rate is expected to be the seventh highest among Sub-Saharan African countries this year, maintaining that the high inflation would hamper the country's attempt to achieve economic recovery and erodes the purchasing power of most vulnerable households. The World Bank also highlighted the adverse effect of inflation, if not well contained, will push 8 million Nigerians into poverty, thereby affecting economic productivity, job creation, and further constraining the nation's economic recovery efforts of the monetary and fiscal authorities. It's really interesting to know that Nigeria's inflation rate has been on a downward trend for 8 consecutive months, but its impact has not been seen or felt on masses as prices of consumer goods keep skyrocketing. Well, I introduced him earlier. He's an economist and tax manager at PwC, Mr. Abiodun Kayode. Good afternoon, Mr. Kayode. It's good to see you.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to start with that downward trend that we've seen for like 8 months, and many would say that that is not what we see when we go to the markets. We all have wives and we know what we've been buying before now and what we buy at the moment. So what's responsible for this not at par as what we would expect? The figures are going down, but outrightly things are still expensive.
Well, you're quite right, Tolu. So that report, it's quite an interesting report. So the inflation index number that you have there, what it simply does is that it shows you an aggregate, a composite of different baskets of goods and services, right? So if you consider that composition, if you decide to disaggregate it, the one that actually impacts people is the food index, right? And that one is something around 17%. So the reality, like you rightly said, a lot of people, by the time they actually get to the market, they find out that the price of goods and services are actually higher, right? And that's quite true, but you have to disaggregate it before you actually understand the impact. And to buttress what you've said, I mean, just like your report said concerning the cooking gas, right? There are a lot of food items that have actually changed over time. So take the cooking gas as for instance, January 2021, that was about 3,600 naira for a 12.5 kilogram KGCL, right, cylinder. Then by the time you now consider the price as at December 2021, it's kind of rose up to 8,200. That's more than 100% increase, right? So that's the reality of things, right? But one important thing that we must mention is that you need to also consider what is called the base effect, which I'm sure most you've reported on your program so many times, right? So if you look at it, that we're coming from a pandemic year, the year 2020, where things were generally down. If you look at inflation in itself, inflation is defined as a rise in the general level of prices. So by the time you do that comparison between 2021 and 2020, where we're taking our base year from, it will actually give you a lower figure. So that's why you see that disparity. And just like the report you made mention of about how in the actual sense, the inflation shock has actually moved people. It has moved a lot of people below the poverty line, right? I can imagine if you want to buy probably food, if you go to your eatery, right, the things you could actually get for a certain amount, you can't get them any longer for that same amount, right? So what you find yourself doing, or what most households have found themselves doing, is they found a way to ration out their food consumption, right? So what they are simply doing is that they are probably avoiding some things they can do without, right? It's sad, but that's the reality we find ourselves in.
A good one. We've also seen the CBN, of course, at the forefront of all of this, trying to, make up ways to pump in interventions and all of that to help stabilize the economy. And of course, the fiscal side also has a role to play in all of this. But in assessing all these interventions, how does it come to you? Do you see light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, that's a very interesting one. To some extent, the CBN has actually done a lot during this period, and the Nigerian government as well has tried to do as much as it can. But one thing we are going to see, you made mention of different interventions. Yes, the CBN has doled out some funds to help households and small businesses. And it has actually helped them stay afloat, right? It has actually helped them perform better than they would have without that intervention, right? But a lot much more is expected from the CBN. And if you also look at some policies that have been introduced by the CBN, it seems like there's a bit of a contradiction, right? It seems like there's a bit of a contradiction. So at one hand, you are trying to help small businesses and households, and on the other hand, it seems like you dole out some policies that are also impacting them, right? A good one is the exchange rates, the multiple exchange rate system that we have currently operating, right? You see that even though some Nigerians, right, even though they don't need these exchange, they don't need this foreign exchange, right? But somehow the policies you take impact them because some of the items they actually consume are imported. Sadly, we're an importing nation, right? So most of the items that we actually consume are imported. If you look at the World Bank report, that report for November actually made reference to a policy that was taken back in August 2019, where the borders were closed, the land borders were closed. It's interesting to find out that the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, right, there was this estimate they released. They said that of the 6.27 million metric tons of rice that is being consumed by Nigeria annually, only 57% of that is produced locally. So if you look at that statistic, if we are producing just 57% of what we consume, and you go about closing the land borders, right, it kind of begs the question: where do you get the rest, right, that would actually feed our consumption, our local consumption? So I do give it to the CBN that they've actually tried with a lot of policies to assist small businesses. A recent one was towards the end of last year, there was this 100 for 100 policy initiative whereby the CBN was going to give 5 billion to businesses, about 100 businesses for like 100 days, right? These are interesting at a single digit interest rate, 5 to 9%. So these are actually good things that the CBN is actually doing, but a lot more needs to be done. That's from the side of the CBN. Then if you also look at it from the side of the federal government, because this is the things that are actually driving prices up is food, right? And that's what concerns the common man. The NBS reports that was released last year say something like the average household spends 56% of his income on food. By the time you consider the common man, the poor individual, he spends a lot more than that, right? So if you consider some particular problems that we have in this food belt, these food producing regions, problems like security challenges, these are some of the things, and even the transport system, getting good roads to transport goods from where they are produced to where they will be consumed. These are problems that can be fixed by storage. A very good point you made mention. A lot of these things get spoiled, and we just have to scavenge for the little that we have left. So these are some of the problems that are giving rise to the increase in food items currently.
You touched on that very big one that we always talk about, the forex issues and what have you, and we've grappled with this, and we see the central bank also trying to defend the naira, let's put it that way. But many are saying that, are we going to continue to sustain this? But the argument again is always that we are not a producing nation, we are not this, we are not that, and they say we are diversified. How does that come to you?
Okay, that's a very interesting one, and you are quite right. The CBN is trying as much as it can to defend the naira, and in fact, the honest truth is, like you rightly said, how long can they go about doing this, right? Because it's causing a big problem, right? It's just like we're kicking the can down the road. You might continue to do this, but it's not sustainable, and that's what the World Bank has actually advised, right? It also affects foreign direct investment. And foreign direct investment is what we need right now, right? I want to pick a classic example of Egypt. Right, Egypt in 2016, the same time we went into the recession, they tried to secure a 12 billion loan from the IMF, and they were given a condition to deregulate their market. Right, they just had to go through the austerity measures, and Egypt actually took that measure. It was painful. Our Sisi, the president, was trying to encourage people that they would go through this difficulty within a short time, but over time things will get better. Egypt, their inflation rose up from about 11% to 20% between 2016 and 2017. But I tell you that as at 2019, Egypt's inflation had come down to something around 6%. In 2020, Egypt is one of the only nations in the world that experienced a GDP growth. Right, in 2020, even when world developed economies were experiencing a negative growth, Egypt experienced a positive growth. Egypt's inflation as at November is something around 5%. Right, so you just have to bite the bullet. Right, it's going to be difficult. They need to stop defending it, right? It's not easy. It's not easy, to be quite honest, but they need to stop, because there is that room for arbitrage, right? By the time you look at the rates on the parallel market, the rate on the I and E window, very soon, by the time the naira finds its true value, it's going to come up. And this doesn't encourage foreign direct investments, right? Because of that uncertainty. By the time the central bank keeps holding on, trying to defend the naira, it's difficult, but I don't see them doing this for long.
I had an economist here earlier in the week, and he said we should just allow market forces, demand and supply. But that scares me. But that's part of what I would ask you now. Policy issues. What are you thinking? What kind of policies do you expect moving on in 2022? If we are to follow what is on the PIA, subsidy should be out. And like you said, biting the bullet, because that's what they did in Egypt. Can we do that in Nigeria? Can we have the patience for that transition period so that we can, get what we want? What policies do we have any quick wins as we move on in 2022?
That's the big question. That's really the big question. So I think because of the current situation of things, a lot of people are poor.
It's a pre-election year, don't
exactly. That's quite correct. A lot of people are poor. Based on that report that the World Bank released, it was estimated that we have about 93 million people below the poverty line, right? And by the time you take out the subsidy, it's definitely going to impact them, because prices of things, what we are considering here is the welfare of people. How much can they purchase with their income? What's their purchasing power? So the honest truth is, we just have to do it, right? There's no better time to do it but now. We just have to do it. But along the line, we could also introduce like the grants that the government is actually doing, the 5,000, the 5,000 grants, which is given on a monthly basis to 40 million people. And to come to think of it, I did a quick calculation of how much that grant would turn to, because the grant is meant to happen for 12 months. 12 months. Right? So if you do it for 12 months, 5,000, right, 40 million people, 12 months, you'll be getting a figure of about 2.4 trillion, right? Now, the interesting thing is that I think as at November, 10 months, the subsidy was about 1 trillion, right? I think Mele Kyari, the MD, NNPC, said we spend about 150 billion monthly to subsidizing PMS, right? So I think this amount actually seems to be higher. It actually than the subsidy we're going to take out, right? It actually does seem to be higher, but one thing I would say is that if you think about it, there's something a very good friend of mine always says, right? The PMS itself, it's not a direct product that you consume. You don't consume the petrol because you want to consume the petrol. You consume the petrol because you need power, right? To power your generators. You consume the petrol because you need transport system, a good transport system. It's more convenient for you taking your car, moving around with your car, right? What would happen if we had a good transport facility infrastructure, not just in Lagos? So we have the BRT in Lagos. What would happen if we had it across Nigeria? And that would be a lovely thing, right? And also the electricity, power consumption. This is something that impacts on lives. Apart from businesses, also individuals. We say this thing, we say, don't teach me to catch a fish. Sorry, don't give me fish, but rather teach me to catch a fish. All right, why don't you just fix most of these infrastructures? These are like basic infrastructures. Fix them. Most of these people who you call poor, they have ideas. Nigeria is, we have a lot of people with ideas. They can come up with something that would kind of increase their income over time, right? So I think it's very important that we concentrate on fixing infrastructure, right, and making it available for everyone. I think that is going to be very, very important. So that's what I think. So quick wins. One of the quick wins I think we should do is that we should actually consider working on the infrastructure. And also, if you are going to do this, because this 2.4 trillion that we talked about, this subsidy, it's meant to occur for a year, right? 12 months. If you're going to do it for 12 months, there is now the question of transparency. How are you going to select these 40 million people? How are you going to what criteria are you using, right? Are you going to do it based on states, geography, all those sorts of things? So the government needs to be very transparent about this. They need to be very scientific. The Minister of Finance said something during the budget presentation, the analysis presentation. She said something about them considering an option of giving the money to drivers in form of a credit or something like that. Not a bad idea, but one thing I think is very important is that fixed infrastructure, because these things, they have a trickle-down effect. They have a trickle-down effect and they have a multiply effect. Very crucial. So if you're going to remove the PMS, fix these things. And also you need to communicate to the people, because we understand that unions will come up and protest. Different parties will come up and protest. Yes, you need to explain to them. You need to tell them how you are going to use this subsidy, how you are going to reinvest it into something else. Because the honest truth is that it has to be removed. There was a report that came out sometime in May where it was said that Nigeria's consumption of PMS on a daily basis actually jumped from about 52 million to about 71 million. You begin to ask yourselves, did we import new generators or did we import new cars? No. We both know that the answer is simply that these subsidized PMS are finding their way to other countries, right? And it's going to these countries at a subsidized rate, and these guys are capitalizing on that rate. They're actually collecting the market rates for these same items, right? They are collecting it at market rate. They are selling it at market rate, but they are getting it subsidized, right? So their cost is actually lower and they are making significant gains. So the best thing is just to take it out, explain this thing to all parties involved, and find a way to invest in infrastructure in such a way that it will trickle down to the common man. That's what I think we could do.
Very interesting way to lead this conversation. But if we can do this just in 60 seconds, do you think we'll continue this negative flow that's talking about inflation as we move on in this year?
That's a very interesting question. So, like you rightly said, I see two scenarios. It's an election year. One interesting thing I've always seen is that the years before, this is a pre-election year rather, the years before election, inflation rate has always been stable. I looked at the inflation figures from the National Bureau of Statistics for the year 2014, right? And inflation rate was stable at about, I think, 8% then. Then I looked at it also, 2018, sorry, I think about 11%. I also looked at it for 2014, the year before the 2015 election. It was stable at about 8% then. So I don't think it's going to cause a significant impact in inflation as far as the election is concerned. The only thing I see is that if the PMS is actually going to be removed, yes, the inflation is actually going to go up. The PMS is going to be removed. But it's an election year. Politicians would want to win the favor of the masses. Will they remove it? I don't know. If they don't remove it, probably it could go down. Yes.
Mr. Abiodun Kayode Ali is an economist and tax manager at PwC. Thank you so much. Interesting conversation with you. We really appreciate your time on the show.
Thank you.
And enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
All right there. Well, it's time to review trading performance at the Nigerian Exchange Limited. And joining me to do so is equities trader at APT Securities, Mr. APT Securities and Funds Limited, Mr. Jamiu Mohammed. Mr. Mohammed, good afternoon. How are you today?
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be on the program with you.
Yes, market is closing positive. All share index 0.55 today. Top gainers, Maya, Conest, Adova, Boa Foods, PRZ. Top losers, GPLC, Sovereignings, Regalings, UPDC, Julius Berger. What do you make of this positive close for the week?
Yes, you know, in the week, the market has opened the week positively. This is not far from what we expected in the market. Where you see market gain 0.55. The contribution to this is DMA, Boa Foods, and you are seeing the way the Boa Foods are trended since the first day of the week that it has been. I mean, the second day of the year that the stock has been listed. It has gained about 30% today. And because of the fact that Boa Foods is now the most capitalized stock in the consumer goods, it has made the stock to continue to gain, and that is the reason why we have it today. And because of the shares that are most capitalized affect the ASI index mostly, so this one pushed in the index to the positive territory, and we are expected to see that. Because of the fact that you know, later in the year, we begin to see the electioneering campaign to come in, and when such things begin to happen, you see that investor would tend to dump the stock in the market, and that will make the market to continue to come down. But earlier in the year, as we have it now, we continue to see it to go and continue to be on the upward trend, just the way we have been seeing it now, and it may likely continue up to the fourth quarter of the year.
Well, it's a good way to leave it for the weekend. I must thank you so much, Mr. Jamiu Mohammed. We appreciate you for always being there. Enjoy the rest of your day and, of course, your weekend.
Thank you very much.
All right, there, brilliant submission from Mr. Jamiu there about with the markets staying up. Let's see how the market will stay on this positive flank till as we move into the new week. But before we go, let's tell you that Asian shares snapped 2 days of losses today, climbing as investors waited to see whether U.S. job data due later in the day would reinforce the need for faster U.S. interest rate hikes. Now, MSCI's broadest index of Asian Pacific shares outside Japan rose 0.3%, boosted by 1.2% gain in the Australian benchmark, where bank stocks were to the fore, though Japan's Nikkei gave up early gains to slip 0.66%. Nasdaq futures rose as much as 0.5% in earlier Asian trade before giving up some gains to trade 0.25% higher, and S&P 500 E-Manif stock futures advanced 0.17%. Pure electric cars are making all the headlines, but their gasoline electric hybrid rivals quietly achieved record sales in the United States last year, according to industry data. While the likes of Tesla and Ford Motors pushed for electric vehicle sales, Asian automakers boosted hybrid vehicles lineups as many customers still shun EVs due to high prices, limited driving range, or lack of charging stations. U.S. sales of hybrid vehicles sales jumped 76% to 801,550 vehicles last year, accounting for 5% of U.S. light vehicle sales, according to data from analytics firm Words Intelligence. Sales of EVs also jumped 83% to 434,879, but represented a mega 3% of the market. The Swiss National Bank expects to make profit of around 26 billion Swiss francs, an equivalent of $28.2 billion for 2021. Well, that's the latest report from the central bank in its provision results today, as booming stock markets throughout the year added billions to the value of its foreign currency investments. The SNB made a profit of just under 26 billion francs on its foreign currency positions, which include nearly 1 trillion francs worth of stocks and bonds bought during its long campaign to weaken the Swiss franc. The central bank suffered a valuation loss of 100 million francs from its gold holdings, offset by 1 billion franc profit by Swiss franc positions, mainly the negative interest rates it charge commercial banks to hold money overnight. Almost finally, Royal Dutch Shell in its latest announcement says its $7 billion share buyback program, of which $1.5 billion has been completed, will continue at pace despite a slowdown in fuel demand due to Omicron COVID-19 variants. Shell, the world's largest trader of liquefied natural gas, said that its production and liquefaction volumes were impacted in the fourth quarter by unplanned maintenance, mainly in Australia, where its flagship Prelude floating LNG vessels was hit by power outage. In a trading update, Shell says LNG trading results in the fourth quarter of 2021 set to be significantly higher compared to the third quarter. Natural gas and electric prices around the world would have soared since the middle of last year on tight gas supplies and a higher demand as economies rebound from COVID-19 pandemic. And oil prices on international market edge up today, heading for their biggest weekly gains since mid-December, fueled by supply worries amid escalating unrest in Kazakhstan and outages in Libya. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude recorded an increase of 0.52% to sell at $79.87 per barrel. Brent crude sells at $82.40, registering an upward price margin of 0.50%. Bonnie Light's performance is continuing with his winning streak, selling at $82.13 per barrel, with an uptick of 1.50%. For the OPEC basket, crude oil dealers offer $78.93 per barrel, recording a 1.19% surge in price. Well, that's our show for today, and of course, indeed, for the week. Thank you very much for being a part of it. Let's see on Monday, and we'll continue the discussion around the world of business. Stay with TVC News for the rest of our programming. Bye for now.
TVC News First with breaking news.
We cover the big political stories in Nigeria, but people want more than just politics.
Business news, sports naturally, but you need news to live by also.
Stories about education, health, personal finance, and hey, even lifestyle news.
Newspaper reviews, travel news, and much more.
Nigeria, it's more than just politics. It's life.
Start your day with us every weekday.
TVC News Breakfast. First, fast, balanced, and accurate.
TVC News First with breaking news.
The task of the leaders is to get their people from where they are to where they've not been. How do we hold our leaders accountable in the business of lawmaking and representation?
I just telling students that some of us will not be in positions of authority forever. We are going to take over from us. So what we are doing is to lay example for you on how to represent our people.
And how do the people ensure that their constituency projects are executed to the letter?
Any politician that wants to win elections, he doesn't carry the CDAs in their local government along.
From the mountaintops to the deepest valleys, we're ready to go the extra mile just to show Nigerians the constituency project, both federal to state and to local government level. Know your